And joining us now, Jason Stanley, the Jacob Urowski Professor of Philosophy at Yale University and the author of How Propaganda Works. His latest book is How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. And he has an article at The Guardian, Buffalo Shooting, How White Replacement Theory Keeps Inspiring Mass Murder. Welcome to Background Briefing, Jason Stanley.
Thank you so much for having me on, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And on Saturday, this 18-year-old Peyton Gendron drove 200 miles to a black neighborhood in Buffalo and went into the Tops supermarket with his assault rifle. He was confronted by a guard. They exchanged shots. The guard shot at him 3 times, hitting him once in the bulletproof vest, and then he chased the guard through the store, killing black shoppers on the way, and eventually killed the guard, and then was ultimately, after shooting 13 people and killing 10, mostly African Americans, he then surrendered. So you've, I take it, Jason, have read his manifesto, which is largely about white replacement theory. So what's the main takeaway from this 18-year-old's manifesto?
Well, the manifesto borrows heavily from the manifesto of Brenton Tarrant, the Christchurch killer, but is a kind of American version of it, a deeply American version. He's deeply affected by the kind of scientific racism that spills over onto 4chan and various far-right networks, but also is kind of, let's face it, being normalized in some of academia today. So that's a difference between Brenton Tarrant and himself. The similarity is the sharing of the fascist ideology, the white replacement theory, the belief in strong racial difference, which in Gendron's manifesto fuses with the American anti-black racism that black people are genetically less intelligent and genetically disposed to crime, to motivate immense violence against them. And it's linked, in Gendron's case, with a much more explicit and virulent anti-Semitism. He represents Jews as the global elite who are trying to pit non-whites against whites to overthrow whiteness and then take over.
And the Jews, that he devotes 29 pages of his manifesto to blaming white replacement on the Jews. And we all remember, of course, from the
Tree of Life synagogue.
No, I'm trying to think of it. The Charlottesville, Virginia confrontation, where American Nazi tiki torch marchers were shouting in unison, "The Jews will not replace us." So the Jews are being blamed for immigration, in short, right?
Yes.
And critical race theory as well.
Yes. So he fuses everything together in a way that's already being fused together and normalized by essentially the Republican Party, which is that the Jews in the Frankfurt School. He doesn't mention the Frankfurt School explicitly, but he explicitly says Jews are spreading critical race theory to try to make whites feel shameful and guilty about themselves. So that's very similar to what's being broadcast daily from Fox News, that the Frankfurt School, Jews in the Frankfurt School, have brought critical race theory to the United States to try to sort of undermine America from within. So that's amplified and made more explicit. So what you have is a sort of more amplified and explicit form of different elements that are being normalized by the Republican Party and various elements in normal civil society like academia, and made much more explicit. If black people are genetically disposed towards crime and are less intelligent, as this killer claims, and Jews are pushing to replace white society with immigration and to increase fertility rates among black people. He's obsessed with fertility rates, as the other mass killers were before him. Then that motivates a mass killing of black Americans.
And Jason Stanley, you mentioned the 2015 Tree of Life synagogue killings in Pittsburgh. That shooter was explicitly concerned about immigration coming across the southern border from Mexico, all of which was stoked by Donald Trump. That's as clear as day what he was up to, right? In other words, because the synagogue had a program to help refugees, he tied that together with white replacement, in this case being replaced by Hispanics as opposed to blacks.
That's right. So if you this idea that Jews or another sort of global elite are trying to destroy national identity by mass immigration and promulgating minority votes and support within the country runs through the whole 20th century. So the Ku Klux Klan, it's the ideology of the Ku Klux Klan. Hitler admires the United States and Mein Kampf because of its powerful immigration laws that highly restricted non-white and Jewish immigration. So this is both deeply this ideology both has deep historical roots in the United States and is an international far right white ideology that you're seeing across Europe, United States, and other countries as well.
And again, I'm speaking with Jason Stanley, the Jacob Urowski Professor of Philosophy at Yale University and the author of How Propaganda Works. His latest book is How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them, and he has an article at The Guardian, Buffalo Shooting, How White Replacement Theory Keeps Inspiring Mass Murder. And as you point out in your article, Jason, the continuum, of course, is 2011, you have Dylan Roof's mass murder of black churchgoers in Charleston, and then the Tree of Life that we mentioned in 2015, and then in 2018, the murder of 23 people, mostly immigrants in El Paso, Texas. So the beat goes on, and let's talk about who's propagating these disgusting theories. And the person who comes to mind mostly is Tucker Carlson on Fox News. New York Times did a very in-depth study. They looked at all of his programs, and they found that 400 programs in the last few years have been devoted to white replacement theory. So what's happening over at Fox? Is there any, and amongst the Republicans who are part of the kind of echo chamber, any sense of that this is being linked? Fox talking about it in terms of who's taking responsibility?
No one's going to take responsibility. And it's a grand experiment, right? I mean, those of us who study these phenomena and mass violence against minority groups, we're taken aback by this, because to have such an extremist ideology normalized on such a grand scale is breathtaking. Now, Tucker Carlson would never mention Jews explicitly, but there are many dog whistles. But any anti-Semite, any right-wing anti-Semite will understand him as targeting Jews. That doesn't mean that he is explicitly targeting Jews, but it means that every single right-wing anti-Semite, when he goes after George Soros, when he pushes white replacement theory, will hear Tucker Carlson as attacking Jewish people. So he is strengthening anti-Semitic ideology, even though he is not mentioning Jewish people. Of course, he has many Jewish followers and supporters, but those Jewish followers and supporters are literally supporting right-wing anti-Semitism in the United States. Let me add another thing, which is this idea that this linked to the mass normalization of this ideology of white replacement theory. People call this shooter, this mass killer, deranged. But I've looked at his manifesto, and it's a carefully calculated manifesto. He's buried deep into a social identity that is partly constructed out of the violent 4chan far right, but obviously legitimated by the wide circulation of, say, scientific racism and the wide circulation of great replacement theory. He never mentions Fox News. He no doubt regards Fox News as not hardcore enough. But this is not someone who's deranged. This is not someone who's deranged. The philosopher Wittgenstein sees identity, sees rationality as rooted in a search for community. We are creating a community identity surrounding white replacement theory, and that's going to result in vigilante violence, and eventually, once those who have normalized it take over, mass state violence.
So this character, Gendron, he also, of course, as your article points out, Jason, he argues for the genetic basis of the racial IQ gap. But that's also what Tucker Carlson does, albeit somewhat less obvious and less explicit, but still in code. He keeps talking about, he seems to have a real problem with black women. And even the new justice on the Supreme Court, who was absolutely sharp as a tack and serene and dignified as she was assaulted by these disgusting Republican senators, he's now going after the new black White House press secretary, who he refers to as being dumb. So it seemed to me that that's evidence as well of not just the white replacement theory, but also this racial IQ gap. But let's talk a little bit about the role of social media in all of this. Google did take down the manifesto, and he live streamed the massacre on some right-wing site. But here we are in an era where Elon Musk is about to take over Twitter, at least it seems so, and the first thing he'll do is put Donald Trump back on. But the most pernicious thing of all is this new law in Texas, which was blocked last year, but then it was reinstated by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals on Wednesday, and it makes it illegal for any social media platform with 50 million or more U.S. monthly users to block, ban, remove, deplatform, demonetize, deboost, restrict, deny equal access or visibility to, or otherwise discriminate against expression. In other words, this is the anti-woke law that Texas has passed. Now, the group of lobbyists for the tech industry are trying to lobby the Supreme Court to put this on hold. And just to quote from their argument before the Supreme Court, or petitioning the Supreme Court, Texas HB 20 strips private online businesses of their speech rights, forbids them from making constitutionally protected editorial decisions, and forces them to publish and promote objectionable content. Well, in other words, we're heading in an even worse arena, aren't we, than the one that inspired this shooter in Buffalo?
Well, yeah, you're asking a rhetorical question. Yeah, the more what these far right, what the goal of this movement is a sort of threatening, violent, authoritarian takeover, and they're using white replacement theory and similar conspiracy theories in order to do that. They spread these conspiracy theories that are, again, baked into the American past, justify the idea that America is a fundamentally white country, and so non-white votes are not legitimate. So that's the ultimate goal. Now, what you need in a movement like this are both, diehard believers and actors of the sort that Peyton Gendron was, and then you need sort of more respectable figures who can say, oh, yes, maybe what I said would lead you to believe that America is a white Christian nation and with white Christian traditions and only white Christians are legitimate voters. But I never said that. So they have plausible deniability. So these figures want to they want to enable mass harassment of people on social media to make social media more difficult to use for those who don't share that ideology. And they want to destroy the information space. So we're familiar with this from Russia. This is what happened in Russia for many years. It was impossible to know what was true and what was not true. And once you do that, the only sort of person who can speak is sort of the political leader. That's how authoritarianism works. So the only person who matters is Putin, because everyone else, nobody knows what's true. So I see that as the near-term goal of legislation like that, to allow mass harassment of progressive liberal journalists, academics, public figures, and to spread conspiracy theories to destroy reality. and to foment violence, vigilante violence, and to justify state violence against non-white targets.
Specifically, they will be this anti-woke legislation from Texas, which is going to be borrowed by a lot of Republican states. And if the Supreme Court doesn't step in to block it, as the big tech companies are asking them to do, this will mean that more people like this character in the Buffalo shooting will be influenced by this toxic stuff online, and people like Elon Musk will readily propagate it. So that's my concern. I don't have a lot of faith in the Supreme Court. I mean, we have now Clarence Thomas dismissing concern over the loss of reproductive rights in this country as a liberal tantrum. And I'm sure that's the way they see what's happening now with people's outrage over what happened in Buffalo.
The Supreme Court is a far-right Republican authoritarian institution whose goal is to destroy democracy and turn back the clock in the United States on progress for decades, and to facilitate the destruction of democracy. So no, you're not going to get any help from the Supreme Court on this for a long time. And I think the role of these billionaires is to destroy democracy, because democracy places limits on what they can do. And these super powerful billionaires, they think it's, only a loser would let some guy from Oklahoma or a woman from New Jersey vote to constrain their power. So they want to destroy democracy, and they see this as the way to do it. And it's not clear what or who will stand in their way.
So are they happy with the idea of civil uprising, racial strife?
I think they want to split the rest of us who aren't oligarchical billionaires apart and set us against each other, so that they want to make sure democracy is dysfunctional, so there are no rules on them. And if there's no rules on them and we're just facing off against each other, then they're free to do what they want. I mean, how else do you explain Peter Thiel, a multi-billionaire who's LGBT, sponsoring politicians who push anti-LGBT legislation? Because he just thinks, he's exploiting the rubes. He's exploiting the rubes, what he regards as the rubes, and he's going to destroy any sort of functioning democratic institutions that constrain the power of someone like him. And hopefully the United States, those of us who are not billionaires, can wake up and realize that we're together in this fight of defending democracy against its sort of utter destruction.
But just in closing, Jason, do you think that Peter Thiel and also Tucker Carlson, who's not your tattooed redneck racist, but a more genteel white privileged racist coming from a very wealthy family of inherited wealth, together they are essentially toying with a race war, which is what a lot of these far-right groups are wringing their hands over the prospect of?
That's right, because for them, race is always about power. It's a tool the powerful use to divide the working class. Originally, both in the United States and in Nazi and in Germany, it was the tool that was used to destroy the labor movement, the formation of unions. That's why you can get people who aren't racist at all. You can get people who are gay, sponsoring racist legislation, racist politicians, anti-LGBT legislation, because it won't affect them. It's all about destroying. It's all about taking advantage of people with racist views, taking advantage of people with LGBT views. What you do is you finance politicians who will cut your taxes, and in return will feed to the people who you regard as rubes, people who are inclined towards racism or homophobia, sort of red meat culture war stuff. And so while you're picking their pockets. So that's what's going on, and they don't care if the country burns as long as their money is not taxed and their wealth and actions are not constrained. That's why they become so furious when they see a fellow billionaire being constrained in the way that Twitter has constrained Donald Trump.
Well, Jason Stanley, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thanks so much, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Jason Stanley, who's the Jacob Urowski Professor of Philosophy at Yale University and the author of How Propaganda Works. His latest book is How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. And he has an article at The Guardian, Buffalo Shooting, How White Replacement Theory Keeps Inspiring Mass Murder. We're going to take a brief station break and back looking into last week's crash of the cryptocurrency market that wiped out a lot of users like